Okay, welcome back to the Signal Over Noise podcast. Today's episode, Seeing the World Clearly, How Thinking in Systems, or Systems Theory, can help us to armor more effective and perhaps just plain better lives. Let's begin with a true and truly sobering story. It's the 1960s, and the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, is on a mission to increase production of anything and everything that it can sell and make money out of. The central government deemed one particular crop important, that of white gold, or cotton, a notoriously thirsty crop, from which most clothes are made, and even more so were made from prior to the invention of synthetic fibers. The most attractive growing region was circled on a map to be in Central Asia, in the modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The plan was simple: divert water from two great rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya, to irrigate vast cotton plantations, grow cotton, harvest cotton, sell cotton, and/or produce clothes, and reap great benefits in economic prosperity for the motherland, aka the USSR. So, the outcomes. Firstly, cotton production increased. That's good. But because the rivers were plugged into a local ecological system, there were also many unintended or unforeseen consequences. Within a generation, the Aral Sea, that was fed by both of these rivers, once the fourth largest lake in the world, had almost completely disappeared. Fishing industries collapsed from increased salinity or salt content in the water. The exposed former seabed became a center for local toxic dust storms, spreading respiratory diseases, and local climates changed because they were underpinned by the sea. Fishing ports found themselves almost overnight tens of kilometers from the coastline. Life expectancy for the fish dropped. Life expectancy for the humans dropped. The local ecology is still affected and pretty much ruined 70 years on. Here's the sticky bit. This policy was designed not to punish the region, but to enrich the Soviet Union as a whole. There was no villain looking to cause harm deliberately, no stupidity. In fact, you could say that to become a key decision maker in the Soviet Union, whilst keeping your head attached to your shoulders, must have required a lot of smarts. So, just a failure to think in systems. A failure to make proper concessions for the role of these rivers in propping up other local industries and in feeding the Aral Sea and its role driving local weather patterns. Today's episode of Signal Over Noise is all about systems theory, what it is, why it matters, and how learning to see in systems can help you live a more productive, meaningful, and sane life. And it's coming to you in 6 parts, with 5 and part 6 being the implementation parts that you're not going to want to miss. Samuel, how are you feeling?
Good, I think. Systems control sounds a little bit like it might be about to tell me how everything is being connected and controlled by a certain group of people. Perhaps the Illuminati?
You might think that. Or perhaps I'm about to peel back my flesh and reveal my lizard person status. Or potentially systems theory is really about the opposite, and it's hopefully an anti-conspiratorial way of seeing the world rather than a pro-conspiratorial one, because it helps us to understand and explain unforeseen and unintended consequences and second and third order effects rather than just direct outcomes of decisions and actions when those decisions and actions take part in a complex, multifaceted system. So let's get into that. Part 1, what went wrong with the Aral Sea? Kind of already spoiled this one for you, but it wasn't the engineers being incompetent. Well, there were a few leaks and cracks and breaks in the irrigation system, but overall, they were pretty good at doing what they did. The planners weren't malicious. They'd simply optimized for one variable or output, cotton production, without understanding, or perhaps maybe a little bit disregarding, the larger systems. Rivers weren't just water supplies available without consequence. They regulated the saltiness of the Aral Sea, and many of the fish there were evolved for freshwater conditions. The Aral Sea, although it had preceded the lives of most of the engineers involved in the project, it wasn't immutable or immovable. It was reliant on the constant inflows of these two rivers to offset the evaporative loss in a hot part of the world. Agriculture, health, the economy, and climate were all interlinked in a multitude of ways. Some were obvious, some much more opaque. It's almost like a Jenga tower covered in cobwebs. On one level, the obvious level, a Jenga piece can obviously affect the other pieces and the tower as a whole. On another, murkier, harder to understand level, the spider's web, which is delicate and not uniformly patterned and unpredictable, will react in more unpredictable ways to the movement of the Jenga pieces. This is the central warning of systems theory. When you optimize for one particular outcome in a system and treat the system as if the complexity can be ignored and you can go for that outcome in isolation, you run the risk of damaging the whole or changing the system in unforeseen ways. We see this mistake basically everywhere in our lives, across politics, economics, education, productivity, and perhaps throughout our personal lives. Again and again, we can lose sight of the wood for the trees by optimizing for one outcome without asking about the effects on the system as a whole. Take, for example, politics, where we elect politicians who promise us free stuff, but people don't work for free and debts are borrowed from our future selves. Again and again, politicians optimize for what the voting populace wants right now, at the expense of the long-term health of the system, particularly if they can push out the sting in any tail to any of their economic policies or social policies beyond their term in office. In economics, companies optimize for shareholder value, often at the expense of customer experience by worsening their products or nasty terms and conditions, employees by mass-scale redundancies or ever-diminished perks, which are designed usually to reassure these investors that they are good capital allocators, and society by cutting back on social good efforts and programs that don't return shareholder value. For example, closing down company sports teams or sponsorships of local clubs and societies.
Okay, so I guess a lot of this is about greed, or at least, as you say, optimizing for one particular thing. It kind of makes you think about dogs, particularly Labradors, who don't actually know when they're full. They've got that gene or whatever missing from their brain. So imagining leaving them in a bakery or a shop or something, closing the door, and their default behavior will, of course, be to optimize for eating as much as possible, despite that being terrible for the long-term health of that dog, for its fitness, its mobility, of that particular system being the dog. Does that make sense? Like on a really micro level?
Yeah, it absolutely does. That's a perfect example, actually. So you're over-optimizing for one outcome or part of the system, which is calories in, and forgetting that there might need to be some balance to not end up overweight and putting lots of stress through your joints and all that sort of stuff. Those sorts of calculations aren't happening inside the head of the Labrador. Presumably, or they're being overridden and ignored if they are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, lovely. Yeah. Part two. So what is systems theory? It's the study of how parts of interconnected machines or systems interact to produce behaviors and outcomes over time. It was formalized in the mid-20th century by thinkers and authors like J. Forrester, and later popularized for a general audience by a Donella Meadows, author of Thinking in Systems. At its core, a system has four components. It has stocks, or things that accumulate. So, for example, money in a bank, or health in a body, or trust in an institution, or fatigue, maybe again in the body. So these things tend to gradually sort of move up or down over time. It has flows. So that's the rate of change that affect these stocks. So that could be your income or your expenditure affecting your money. It could be your recovery from training, or it could be falling into illness affecting your health. Regards trust, it could be either some activity that further establishes it, or it could be the release of somebody's name in, I hate that I'm going there because we've got a lot of radio play anyway, but the Epstein files. Somebody you like pops up in those, then you don't like them so much anymore. Anyway, it also contains, as well as these stocks and flows, feedback loops, which can be reinforcing or they can be balancing. So I guess a feedback loop in a system is how it responds to these flows. Does it control this kind of like homeostasis, like the thermostat intrinsic to all the cells in our bodies, where it tries to keep it around 37 degrees, or when the flows come in, does it sort of exponentially move the system away from its center? So maybe in the political system, the flow could be increased animosity or reward of posturing towards the extremes through social media. And then you have this feedback loop where the more radically left or radically right your opinion is, the more it gets heard and played, reinforcing a feedback loop that drives the political systems further and further to extreme edges. And we have delays in the system, which is that some effects show up sooner and others show up later. This can depend on the complexity of the system and the size of the flow occurring and how long it takes to flow through and create meaningful impacts on the stocks of the system. This is important. Systems are important as well because they display a phenomenon called emergence, where the output of the whole is greater than just the sum of its parts. For example, a beehive is capable of doing things that 500 individual bees cannot. Most human suffering comes from misunderstanding the feedback loops and potentially from ignoring delay and therefore misattributing what effects moved the stocks or what flows occurred and why. The human body fits the bill of a system. It has stocks of health, vitality, intelligence, etc. These experience flows. Health can deteriorate if we fall from something really high and forget to pull the parachute, for example, or through the process of accumulated damage in aging. There are feedback loops at play. We can increase our vitality through exercise and good nutrition. On the other side, accumulated skin damage as an example of a damaging negative feedback loop with a potential very significant delay because a skin cancer will come as a bit of a sudden shock diagnosis to many. But actually the events leading to it, the years of accumulated DNA damage, have been going on for a long time before. And then when we define the system, there's one last thing that's important to note. It's made of lots of components, but they do not all matter equally always. We have sort of major decision makers and power brokers within a system, and we have the bit part players, or in video game terms, the NPCs, the non-playable characters. This asymmetry of the importance, the relative importance of components, creates leverage points or levers of change. If we change the actions of a major decision maker or a fundamentally important cog in the machine, even if only a little, the output of the system may change a lot. Whereas we could change the actions of many of the NPCs or the non-playable characters in a given system and expend a lot of time and energy without changing the system and its outputs much at all. Take, for example, the Great Oxygen Catastrophe. Sam, you'll probably remember this. It was just over 2 billion years ago. And actually, maybe it was even before your time, because it was a time when all of Earth life was single-celled and anaerobic, in that it didn't use oxygen for energy production. Then, one life form develops the ability to excrete oxygen. It became a major player by inadvertently remaking the atmosphere through its oxygen-loaded farts. It's estimated to have directly caused the extinction of around 80% of the living matter at the time. Why did this happen? Because the oxygen was toxic to all these creatures. And essentially all the other single-celled anaerobic or non-oxygen incorporating or producing organisms became the NPCs of their time with regards to the remaking of the climate. The life form excreting the oxygen, however, contributed to a massive ice age by playing a part in massively reducing the amount of methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere through its reactions with all this new oxygen. The geographic refuges where anaerobic life could continue without exposure to all this toxic oxygen became important key sort of decision makers or vehicles for change or levers in the system. And so did anything that could evolve and adapt to a high oxygen environment, especially those organisms, our early predecessors, that developed systems to use oxygen as part of their energy metabolism. And now, basically every species we can think of thrives on oxygens. These were important parts of the system. Hopefully this story shows us leverage points are 1, changing over time, 2, often hard to predict and foresee, and 3, not equally available to everyone everywhere. However, it should also give us reason for optimism, because if we can identify a point of leverage, we can effect change on large, unwieldy systems that would otherwise be beyond our scope of influence. Samuel.
Dude, I feel like we need to find that, what did you call it? Anaerobic, and I'm not sure what you called it. We'd find that thing though. That's what the world needs right now.
Some
Yeah,
oxygen
that's crazy.
farts instead
Some
of the other
oxygen
things that are coming out of people.
farts. Exactly, not the cow farts that do the opposite thing. But yeah, mate, have you got any examples of leverage points that maybe people have access to in their own lives?
Yeah, I guess it depends what the system we're working on is. We've spoken about the human body and fitness. I guess leverage points there are the things that are really going to move the needle. So a high leverage point, if you want to not have skin cancer, would be applying sunscreen or wearing long sleeve clothing. Whereas a lower leverage point might be, I think of a very, very barely effective approach to addressing your skin cancer risk.
Vitamin D tablets? I don't know.
Yeah, that would be an example of something that doesn't really have any effect at all whatsoever. So that'd be an example of that. I guess regards weight loss, a high leverage point would be, when is it that you're putting all this bad stuff into you? Is it because it's at home? And would you have a perfectly nice evening not eating whatever it is, chippies, crisps, chocolate, whatever you enjoy after dinner, if it's not in the house? So a high leverage point there would be your groceries, your weekly grocery shop. That's one that sticks out to me. Do you have any for us before we move on to part 3?
No, mate, you're all good. I think you used some good examples there.
Thank you. So part 3, why humans are bad at seeing systems. Evolution wired us for surviving long enough to procreate, doing it, then sticking around just long enough to see your children do the same. We also evolved in simpler, less interrelated sets of systems. There was no economy. We didn't have these complex human fictions. Beyond you hunt, we gather, then let's share. And no politics beyond, I guess the strong one with the alliances is in charge for most of the rest of us, and we'll just have to like it or lump it. And so that was the case for most of human history. Those are the conditions in which we evolved. Food was precarious, and we weren't apex predators. There were things that wanted to kill us everywhere. So we tend to see linear cause and effect and understand single causes leading to single outcomes, denying the complexity of many modern systems because we're not evolved to live in such complex modern systems. And we tend to think and act with short time horizons because it kept us alive, and survival used to be a lot more precarious than it is now. So basically evolving long-term planning was of little to no positive reproductive fitness benefit until we became apex predators. So yeah, we often see or seek to see single cause driving single effect, and we particularly like that when it happens over short time frames, and we can sort of visualize the whole thing, leading us to focus on visible, immediate, tangible outcomes. But many systems also produce invisible or scarcely visible, delayed and intangible outcomes. Here's the thing. Systems can be nonlinear, counterintuitive, and slow. Then, suddenly, they produce or have tipping points and cliff edges. This is why diets work, then suddenly fail, because calories in versus calories out fails to account for metabolic adaptations, reducing calories out as we go. Or psychological breaks, I suppose, and flipping out because the diet's too restrictive. Burnout sneaks up on high performers because it can be often dismissed and ignored because it's neither immediate nor tangible in its milder forms, until a tipping point is reached and a crisis occurs wherein you can no longer deny that it's happening. policy fixes often backfire because when governments intervene, there are unintended consequences. For example, offering financial support for longer mortgages with lower deposits tends to make housing more unaffordable and burdensome because the stock of houses hasn't necessarily increased, but buyers are now able to bid up to what they can pay back over 40 years instead of 30 years. The product is that the sellers demand more money and young people are under the yoke of their mortgage for even longer. Relationships can collapse out of nowhere because of compounding stresses accumulating and leading to a sudden rupture or realization of no longer being in love. Often the system was talking to us the whole time. We just weren't listening because we weren't able to monitor or track various important outputs that were neither tangible nor visible.
So basically, we spent the last 200,000 years evolving our brains to get really good at not being eaten. And now we're surprised we can't predict the consequences of a new tax policy. Makes sense.
Yes, I suppose it does make sense. Part 4 is systems theory in human society. Let us zoom out. Healthcare systems, they reward intervention, not prevention. So doctors and surgeons get paid to fix problems that already exist. And that's therefore precisely what they'll do. On the other hand, only a tiny amount of healthcare budgets goes into preventative medicine or combating the economic interests of people profiting from making us fatter and more unhealthy. Take, for example, Ozempic and the GLP-1 agonists, an expensive solution to an expensive problem. As most of us are living in an obesogenic environment where fast food companies invest millions into seducing us to eat more than is good for us, perhaps a better bang for the buck sort of investment would be in nutrition and cooking education and tighter regulations on food quality and advertising to save us the middle part of spending all those years getting larger than we'd like to be and having to experience that and lug it around before then figuring out a way to be able to afford Ozempic to try and shift some of it. Then, as we talk about often on Signal Over Noise, there's the social media companies which optimize for engagement, not well-being, and not connectedness, really. Meta, Twitter, and the likes have hit upon an unexpected and unwanted jackpot. Fear, anger, and outrage are terrific for engagement, and this serves their shareholders. They chose to become listed companies. I know one of them's gone private now, but in doing so, they chose to align themselves with the motivations or incentives of making money. Now, every battle fought in the comments section is another paid advertisement. The collateral damage is increased perception of fear, hatred, and distrust in those of us that are online and experience the world through our online time. But it makes money. Great. Economic systems chase growth. Resilience. 40% of the S&P 500, the biggest 500 publicly listed firms in the US, is made up of 10 technology companies. They don't employ that many people, and they're very effective in lobbying for loose regulation of, well, the spreading of hate mail and misinformation. Plus, they've got the best lawyers and accountants and lobbyists in the world helping them to funnel money through places like Ireland to minimize their contribution to society through paying taxes, so we can maintain streets, have parks, etc., etc. There's really no conspiracy required to understand this. We just see a system optimizing for a particular outcome, worsening its performance across other outcomes, some of which are quite negative and importantly negative. As Donna Meadows, the one that popularized systems theories, noted in her book, the purpose of a system is what it does, not what it claims to do, not what its designers intended, but what it produces over time. That's the purpose. The trick here is that we should watch where people walk and the direction of their feet, rather than listening to what they talk and what they have to say. Systems are good or bad based on a broad sweep measurement of all of their outcomes. And as the 20th century American economist Thomas Sowell and his 21st century British parrot Konstantin Kissin say, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So, though people will try and optimize for perfection in the system across a broad range of markers, essentially no complex system is going to be perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All this reminds me of something I read about a while ago, which is that Henry Ford, the creator, obviously, of the Ford Motor Company, intentionally paid his workers twice the industry average in order for them to maybe one day be able to afford to buy a Ford car. It had the unintended consequences of also giving them the finances they needed to be able to buy other consumer goods or household appliances like fridges, freezers, washing machines, whatever, that were all coming onto the market at the same time. All of which had the maybe intended, maybe not intended consequence of actually improving the system within which the Ford Motor Company existed, the community and country. When I was like thinking about this, it kind of like dawned on me that maybe this feels a little bit like socialist for one of the world's most significant industrialists whose impact is still very much felt today. But then also perhaps maybe not. Maybe the unintended consequences of this actually laid the foundations for consumerism, for which the American economy has done very, very well over the past century. So yeah, I like it. It's interesting to see it playing out, isn't it, in the real world?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I guess, unfortunately, what we've subsequently realized with consumerism is you don't actually have to put money into people's hands and pockets before you turn them into voracious consumers of whatever it is you can shove down their throats. You can instead create debt facilities and allow, personal debt to massively multiply.
Hello, Clavio. Oh, is it Clavio? What's that thing called? Klarna. That's it.
Klarna. Yeah, which I think once was valued at like $40 billion for basically being a credit company that doesn't do credit checks. We'll see how that pans out. Back to systems theory. Part 5, using systems thinking in your own life. Here's where hopefully this gets useful. 1, it can lead us to stop treating an individual symptom as a cause or thinking in monocausal, oversimplified systems. Poor focus often isn't just a willpower problem, though we'd like to sometimes just approximate it to a single problem, hoping that the fix is easiest. Often there's some other things going on into the system, you, the person that's struggling to focus, that improve or weaken your ability to focus. It could be how you've been sleeping recently. It could be the other things you've got going on right now. It could be your workload, or it could be that there's an environment system problem, or your environment is really bloody distracting. Sometimes it's a motivation thing. We simply don't care about something, and maybe it's something we used to care about. So it might be a new motivation thing. Our priorities and our preferences, which play a part in any system that we play a part in, change. So instead of saying, I need to focus more or try harder, ask yourself, what system produces this outcome of sustained focus on something I wish to do repeatedly? Maybe, as we spoke about in James Clear's Atomic Habits review episode, it's habit coupling. Maybe it could be putting a bit of Marvin Gaye on Spotify, or coupling an important task with your favorite hot beverage, or it could be the removal of distractions like your phone from the environment. 2, look for reinforcing loops to perpetuate good habits and behaviors. An example of a bad one would be stress equals poor sleep equals worse performance at work equals more stress. Or an example of a good one might be good cardiovascular fitness leads to sustained energy through the day, leads to consistency turning up at the gym, leads to better fitness. So that's an example of those feedback loops reinforcing either in a positive or a negative sense. Your job isn't to swim against the tide and do things that require Herculean effort. It's nudging loops in the right direction by finding ways you can reinforce them and reap the benefits again and again. 3, respect delays. Training, learning, investing, and relationships all work on some level of delayed returns. Quit too early and you'll miss the compounding interest on your efforts. Push too hard and the bill arrives later, but with interest. 4, change the environment, not the person. Want to read more? Remove friction, not add guilt. Pick the medium you enjoy to read on most. Want to eat better? Change defaults, not motivation. So again, this is what goes in your basket in the supermarket, or reconfiguring your regular online order. Want meaning in your life? Align daily actions with your long-term values. First, you've got to figure out what they are and what matters to you. And then ask yourself, what would someone you respect and admire do with their time? Do that. Willpower, it's a terrible long-term strategy. Configuring systems to be inviting, appealing, and doable, even when you're exhausted and your willpower is low, is going to lead to successes through repeated actions in the right direction. 5. Search for leverage points in your life. Attempt to modify them. Measure the effect over time and re-evaluate whether your search has been successful or not. Part 6. Meaning through systems awareness. Here's the quiet, maybe even a little bit spiritual payoff that allows you to be kinder to yourself and others by using systems thinking. It should make you humbler because you'll see unintended consequences emerging without design or malicious intent just about everywhere that we have a system at play. It should make you kinder because you see that systems have constraints and necessary trade-offs built into them, not simple moral failures, because systems cannot be optimized for all favorable outcomes equally without demanding more from their inputs. And it will hopefully make you more effective. You'll become better and better at isolating highest leverage insertion points into systems by practicing this again and again and reviewing and evaluating whether you've been effective in finding those leverage points, giving you good bang for your buck in times of your inputs. And you may stop trying to control the world and start learning how to participate wisely in it. That's not just productivity. Hopefully, there's some meaning in that for you too.
I kind of like coming out of this thinking or seeing the world more as like, I think you used the phrase spider's web at some point, as opposed to just like a sequence of direct linear cause and effect, which is quite a nice way to envision the world, really, because I think it would be very easy to just point at anything going wrong and being like, that's a direct consequence of something. But maybe it's just, as you say, like it's a consequence of that particular thing not being the priority or optimized for by a decision maker, whereas maybe something else somewhere else has been optimized, and maybe that's where the attention, effort, and impact has gone. So yeah, no, this is interesting. I like it. So I see the world a little bit differently.
Cool beans. Shall we bring this one into land?
Yeah. Go on then. Make this simple for me out.
The collapse of the Aral Sea wasn't caused by evil people, it was caused by narrow thinking. The same forces operate at smaller scales within each of us, in our careers, in our health, our relationships, and our societies that we want to be active and positive members of. The better we understand the systems that we operate inside of, the less surprised we will become by life, and the more capable we'll be of shaping it gently, patiently, and sustainably. So, in today's episode of Signal Over Noise, the signal is the high leverage points or agents of change within a system. The noise is the myth that the systems we participate in are simple cause-effect machines that can be fully understood without depth, detail, and nuance, and that they don't have trade-offs baked in. On that note, thanks so much for listening. If you're getting value out of our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Until next time, be well and do good.